Welcome to the Podcast Editors Mastermind, the show for professional podcast editors, managers, producers, basically the professionals who want to build a better business and better lives doing what they love. Today, we're talking about a strange paradox in our industry. Many podcast editors and producers aren't podcasting themselves. So we have a panel of pros to unpack why that is. I did this to myself, everyone. We'll explore the very challenges from time constraints to burnout to perfectionism, but also the untapped benefits that a personal podcast can bring to your career and reputation. Whether you're publishing weekly or haven't hit records in years, this conversation is for you. Hi, I'm Mark Deal, and as always, I'm joined here by Steve Stewart, and we have quite a wide array of panelists here. So, Steve, who do we have joining us today?
We have with us another Steve. We'll just go ahead and call him Steve too. Steve Cosio from podcast Mansfield in Mansfield, Texas. Is that correct?
That is correct. Mansfield, Texas.
You've been doing that show for a while.
Well, Podcast Mansfield is the studio in which others come to record, but my podcast is called About Mansfield, and I've been doing that 5.5 years.
So that branding gets a little confusing.
Well, we call it AM and PM. AM is the podcast about Mansfield. PM is the studio that people record in.
Excellent. Well, we're really glad to have you here. Also with us today is Julia Levine. She is thepodcastteacher.com. Welcome.
Thanks, Steve. I'm so happy to be here.
And then let's go to John Gay, Jag in Detroit, who's now Jag Podcast Productions, or rebranding. Is that what I heard?
Yeah, did the rebrand in August just before Podcast Movement. So Jag in Detroit Podcast is now Jag Podcast Productions. I am now location agnostic due to having a lot of virtual clients. Good to be here.
It's a lot of work in rebranding, something especially that's geographically tied with something like that.
Yeah, new website, new, change over all the socials, get the email. It was a lot of work, but hopefully worth it in the end.
Good. We're going to be talking today, as Mark said, I'm going to simply call this, why aren't you podcasting? We're talking to podcast editors, podcast managers, podcast producers. It's a debate, I think, within our community as to why or why not people should or should not be podcasting themselves. I can see the pros. I can also see the cons. I think you guys can feel it too. So I want to flesh that out today in this conversation. The history I've got is I did a show for 5 years, then retired it to go full-time into podcast editing, wanted to get back into it for years. So I'm going to take the position of, and Mark's kind of the same way, of we aren't actively podcasting, although it seemed kind of weird since we are actually hosting this show. Why do you think it's such a contention within our industry to say, oh, you should be doing a show, or oh, you shouldn't be doing a show? Let me go to Steve too first. Steve Cosio. Why do you think it's such a debate?
Why is it such a debate? But well, first of all, the editors, do the editors really have time to do a podcast? And I'm kind of a 50-50. 50% of my energy goes toward my podcast, which is a weekly podcast. And the other half goes to taking care of my clients that actually come into the studio and record their podcast here. My podcast, which is local news, so it is what they call my target listener is within 36 square miles, because our city doesn't have a newspaper. The week that the newspaper went out of business was the same week that we started our podcast back in the first week of 2020. So and I know we'll get into burnout and stuff like that, but so the long answer to your question is podcast editors. That's their main focus. So why do a podcast?
But if I'm doing a cooking show, if I'm producing a cooking show, why do I need to know how to be the chef? I think that's kind of the scenario we can put in place there is, why do I have to do all the things? I can do this over here really well. Why do I have to be over there also being the cook and the waitress and the bottle washer and stuff like that? Julia, what do you think?
So I think that it involves a lot of understanding and empathy of what our clients are experiencing. I learned so much more about the process of creating a podcast firsthand once I actually started my own podcast. And just the process of putting together an outline or a script, the process of recording. As an editor, I would sit there and look at recordings, and sometimes I'd be like, why are they making that noise? Don't they know they're making that noise? And then as I'm recording myself and editing myself, I'm like, wow, I made a noise in the recording and I had no idea I was making that noise. And so it helped me have a deeper understanding for what to expect and not expect from clients.
Empathy came into the picture. The question then, I guess, is if somebody's never actually done a podcast before, should they start a podcast before they even start to help on the post-production side? Jag, what do you think?
I don't think it's necessary, but it's helpful. I'm with Julie's point of view, where it's, you learn by doing, and I will help coach clients through. Hey, you use this crutch word or this crutch phrase a lot, and then I was podcasting and I realized I had my crutch phrases as I was editing myself. So it gives you. I love the empathy term, because that's really what it is. But everything is conceptual if you're only editing a podcast. But if you're actually doing the podcast, if I'm offering a critique of a client, it softens it a little bit and makes it more relatable. If I say, hey, you know what? I have these crutch words that I use, so I totally know how that can happen, but here's something to look out for. Here's where, you got to be careful about that. If I kind of put that self-deprecating humor on myself and say, hey, I do this all the time, so I get it, but here's a coaching point and something for you to work on in future episodes, I think that gives me a little bit more credibility when critiquing and coaching clients.
Can I expand on that?
Please do.
Okay. Yeah. Mentoring the client. The podcast editor has to have that experience behind them so that they can transfer that experience to their clients. How to properly talk into the microphone, how to look at the camera as opposed to staring at yourself on the screen if you're using video, how to use pauses to your benefit. Pregnant pauses are great if they're used properly.
Put an extra space in there to make it feel
I see what
really
you did there,
uncomfortable
Steve.
to the people.
Nice.
Yeah. You come to a point where, Steve Cosio, you were talking about how you've got two shows. Well, you've got the production agency and then you do your own show. And there's people like me who are like, we just don't have the time to be able to do all the things. I'm running a successful podcast production. I don't want to call it an agency. It's a business. I've got up to 20 shows going on at the same time. How in the world can I fit a quality show into there? Because anybody can just record stuff on Zoom and puke it up on YouTube, call it a podcast, even though it's certainly not a podcast, and they, go on their merry way. Great for marketing, maybe, but horrible as the art. How do we, as podcast editors, look at other people and say, oh, you're not doing a podcast, you're not really qualified to edit a podcast? How can we say that when I completely understand the situation? There's just not enough time in the day. I'm running a successful business in the podcasting space. What's wrong with that scenario?
So I think that there's definitely validity to that. When you are a podcast editor and you are primarily concerned with making the best audio product that you can make, then maybe actually you don't need to be podcasting. I know that sounds a little hypocritical since I just talked earlier about how I have my own podcast and why that's important. At the same time, I think that we as editors think that editing is more important than the average podcaster. When you mentioned the comparison of, a great product audio-wise versus marketing tool, most of our clients are more concerned about the marketing side of it. They want it to sound good, yeah, but ultimately, if it sounds really good, but they're not getting clients, they're not getting traction, they're not getting sponsorships, whatever it is their goal is for their podcast, if that's not happening for them, they don't really care that it sounds amazing. So I think there's a balance of things there, and I think that we as a group tend to put more priority into the sound quality, and that's not necessarily a universal concern. And certainly as I've been doing my own podcast, my editing skills on my own podcast, it's not the same level that I edit my clients' shows. And there's a reason for that.
Could I dovetail off of that point? And it is funny because that's when you're editing your own podcast, you can sometimes experiment with different things and different strategies because there's no revenue attached to it. I took a business class in the fall, and one of the things they talked about is the hours in your day. What are you doing for revenue? Like, what is the direct correlation between hour X you spent and what does that mean for revenue? So I think that's something to keep in mind when you're wrestling with this idea of should you do a podcast or not? Think about what your goal for that podcast is. Is it a branding tool for you as an editor, producer, as an expert in the space? Is it a lead gen tool for you? Is it just simply to get the reps because you enjoy it? So think about what your motivation is for the podcast and can that help you? I restarted my podcast when I did my rebrand because I wanted to establish myself as the expert and hopefully have that be a lead gen tool into the old sales funnel and revenue and all those cliches that we hear about in every business webinar ever. But think about the why and kind of use that as a reason to do it and to fight off pod fading, I'd say.
Well, John, your podcast is about podcasting. Julia, your podcast is definitely, you're focused on launching shows and getting people into a membership, that sustainability piece.
Launching and growing.
Yeah. Steve, Cosio, your podcast isn't about podcasting though.
No, it's not.
What is the benefit to you for having that show? Do you get an ad dollars? Are you selling affiliate stuff? Are you selling a membership of your own? What's the deal?
With the local news, just like people would advertise in the local newspaper, people are advertising on About Mansfield, and that is so. To John's point, you have to weigh, is the amount of time that I'm putting into my podcast taking away studio dollars from future clients, and in my case, I look at it as my podcast is actually renting studio time. And is it paying for the studio time, if that makes sense? So I focus on my podcast Mondays and Tuesdays. Mondays are writing days, Tuesdays are production days. And so what does it cost to rent the studio for an entire day, Monday and Tuesday? And is About Mansfield paying for it? It is.
Yeah. So if we were to throw out just some round numbers that people can think about, let's say you make $500 a day, weekdays, 5 weekdays. That's a really good income, right? So you'd say your show for 2 days would have to make $1,000, while the other 3 days where you're working on the other things, you're generating $500 on Wednesday, $500 on Thursday, $500 on Friday. If it's not doing it on Monday, Tuesday, do you continue? Do you have some other motivation to keep doing the show?
Yes, because it's fun.
There you go. Okay.
And also, okay. So that was the flippant response. No, that I also feel that there's a responsibility that I have personally created. I am the local news for the city of Mansfield for 80,000 people. When something happens in town, they're turning to me for unbiased information. And so if I stop, what's going to happen? Who's going to go where for news?
I'm going to answer that with another flippant answer,
okay,
just like you had. Somebody else will fill that space. But if you don't let go of the reins, then nobody will, unless they come in and they really want to take over. Maybe they launch the paper again, something like that.
A newspaper in 2025, Steve?
Yes.
Online, right? Because the dollars are there apparently because Steve's making some money on the show to keep it going. He also is doing it because it's fun and he feels like there's a responsibility, which I don't know if there's a lot of podcasters who feel that same way. That's an interesting aspect of doing the podcast. Like, I am responsible for my community to keep doing this podcast. I think we all just love the niche that we're talking about, and we want to help others at least experience the same joy that we do when we're doing the show. But Julia, your podcast is about podcasting. Straight up, you've been doing this now for what, 2 years, 3 years?
I've had the show for actually only about a year and a half.
Oh, okay. Seems like longer than that.
Well,
Post-COVID time seems a stretch.
Yeah.
And so your show's really active in the space. You're trying to get people to start shows and everything. So I know you've got people who are coming to you and they've got their challenges as well. Is there anything that I haven't mentioned here that is a challenge for people who they can't get past it to be able to start a show? What's the argument that they might be giving you?
Like objections that potential clients are giving me to start a show?
Yeah.
Oh, there's an endless list. I'd say the one that we kind of haven't talked about is just that mindset piece, that imposter syndrome, that who am I to make a podcast about this topic? Who's going to listen to me? Why should I bother to do this? There are already so many people in the space. There are already bigger and better people covering this topic. What possibly can I contribute to that? And so that internal struggle is a lot of what I coach people through.
That's incredible. That's exactly what I was experiencing. I felt like I needed to do some kind of a editing podcast, which I know involves a lot of visuals. So I wasn't going to do that. Only when the Yetis of this show originally were going to let the show go and they offered it to us, did Mark and I get together. Actually, I thought Mark was going to say no. I really didn't think he was going to say yes. He jumped on it.
They are the only Yetis I like, by the way.
I think many people in our industry feel the same way. Yeah, as Steve knows, I ride the no train a lot. So he's like, Mark, this is probably another thing you're going to say no to. So yeah, let's unpack that a little bit, Steve. So when we launched Podcast Editor Academy, which by the way was in the planning 6 to 9 months before we let people know that it was about to happen, you and I had this kind of discussion, and you said, Mark, I do not want to do a podcast to promote the Podcast Editor Club, the Facebook group of almost 10,000 people, Podcast Editor Academy, now an online resource over 6 years old and continuing to grow. You did not want to do a podcast. I'm like, that's fine, Steve. There's other things that we can do other than a podcast. Did I know that we were missing out on opportunities? Sure. But I also knew that both Steve and I had pretty active client loads and we were happy with where we were at. And we thought, well, let's do this Podcast Editor, the Academy without a podcast. That being said, when we had our initial conference, the Podcast Editors Conference, remember the original 4 Yetis got together and they recorded episode 1. In fact, I found a good place for them. They were looking for a place to record. Like, oh, I got a perfect place for you. And as I sat down to record, I was taking some pictures. So if you go back to episode 1 and look at those pictures of them around a conference floor in this back alley that no one was at, that was me taking the photos. Steve and I were fans of this show since day one, and we've promoted it to all our channels, since day one and since day two. We've even thrown some sponsorship dollars at it, and then when it became available, I'm like, yes, now is the time to do it and to grab hold. So that's a little bit of backstory there.
Yeah. Well, you said I did not want to do a podcast back then. I still kind of don't want to, because this is really time consuming and, as you know, could be expensive. And if you take the opportunity cost into account, definitely the expenses come there. Although here's the problem. And Steve Cosio, you said it. It's fun.
It's fun.
We did a recording earlier today. Fantastic. This one I know I'm going to enjoy also. And it's fun. And I love it. And we're getting the community together. And I feel a little bit of responsibility there, just like you did, Steve.
So if this is a podcast presented by Mark and Steve, who's going to edit this podcast?
Well, it's going to be either myself, if I think that it's something that I want to tackle because it's got some complicated edits, or it's going to be Alejandro, who's been the editor before we even became the host of the show. So we've got the resources, but Alejandro doesn't come free. Obviously, we need to pay him, and we need to pay him wisely because he's a good editor. So there's the expense there.
And that's the post-production stuff, which we're all familiar with. But Steve, you mentioned earlier that, podcasting is cumbersome. Well, there is a challenge, and every challenge is a business opportunity. And I definitely think as post-podcast production professionals to understand those challenges that our prospective clients may have, because we have felt those ourselves, and here are methods and ways in which we overcame them. And honestly, many of us started podcasting long before we started editing, few of us well over a decade ago. And the challenges back then are different than the challenges now. So even though if we started podcasting and then went into post-production full-time, didn't have a show of our own, well, now there's new challenges and new tools and new things that we can help our new clients with so that they have more resources in order to have a more successful show. Above and beyond just, hey, give us an audio file, we'll produce it, publish it, and you're good to go for the next one.
Let me go to John, because John, your release schedule has been very sporadic, and you do a show that's usually less than 5 minutes long. It seems like something that everybody should be able to handle, even in a time-constrained life, like I was describing earlier. So I don't want to, try to throw negative things at you here, but, what happened, dude?
No, it's a fair question, Steve. I got busy with client work. Again, not complaining, a great problem to have. And I decided that my time was better spent doing my own editing clients rather than editing my own show. And I just got caught up in a few projects, and it's, I went, all of a sudden I went 3 weeks, then I went a month, then I went 3 months. And that's the old pod fading that we always warn our clients about. I'm excited to get back into it. But to your point about 5 minutes, 5-minute audio podcast, I can write, record, and publish in probably under an hour. 5-minute video podcast, not so much. My background's in radio. I'm an audio guy. I'm self-taught when it comes to video. So right before we started recording today, I was playing with the blinds in my office here because I can't get my lighting right. I look a little grainy on the screen right now because I've got the sunlight coming into my right, your left, as you're looking at it. And so there's all these different pieces of video that, to the point earlier, I'm teaching myself so I can do better with video editing for my clients. But also the UX of it. Do I like Riverside better, or Squadcast, or Descript Rooms? And what have I found to be more user friendly? That when I sign on a new client, should I tell them to go to Riverside? Should I tell them to go to Descript? Should I tell them to go to Zencaster or anything like that? The video piece is what got some time consuming for me, especially because I wanted to try and teach myself video by bringing in graphics and video effects in my show, that I could then feel comfortable using them, to Julie's point, in other shows.
Julie, were you doing a show before the one you're currently doing now, which is podcasting for solopreneurs?
No, that was my first show.
So you were not podcasting when you started as an editor.
Correct.
And I believe, since you brought up the topic, you also had that imposter syndrome going on.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
But did you feel qualified to be able to do the work even though you never podcasted yourself?
For sure, because there's overlap, but there are also distinctly different skill sets. And so I felt very qualified to edit, to produce audio. But I was getting a lot of questions about, how can I get more listeners? How am I creating content that's resonating? How do I know? How do I turn these listeners into my clients? This is the whole reason that I'm doing my podcast. And yeah, I'm getting listeners, which is great, but I need to turn them into clients. How do I do that? And so I identified that there were a lot of gaps, and I knew that I wanted to start a podcast. And so I had start my own podcast on my to-do list for a good 2 years before I actually did it. And part of my challenge, the biggest part of my challenge, was just that I felt that as a podcast professional and someone who has a history of perfectionism, that my podcast would have to be the gold star example for all of my current clients, future clients, potential clients, all of that. And I felt this pressure of, I have to do everything perfectly. I need to have everything set up the way that my clients are going to mimic, the way that to set things up in a way that I am going to get clients from this show so that I can then teach those techniques. And I was in my own head way too much.
I think that's where a lot of people are. I think that's one of the main reasons why people who are podcast editors in the post-production side don't edit. We do the work. We need to get the job done. We may not have the capability to be able to spend the time and energy on getting the show the way it needs to be for us to look like experts. But I have to wonder how many of our potential clients actually would listen to our shows.
Exactly. Do they care? Your last sentence, Steve, get the show to where it needs to be. And it's to what Julia said, perfectionism. We have a very high audio bar that we want to be at. Take out all the flub words, the crutches, everything should go into the next, maybe some B-roll audio. Everything should just sound great. And to your point, Steve, I don't really think a lot of clients listen for that. Now, when it's wrong, they notice it. When it's right, they don't notice it. Steve, you've got a T-shirt. I'm an audio editing ninja. I was never here, and
Bought that shirt, by the way, from Steve.
Yes,
right. It's a great shirt. It's a great shirt, but it really encapsulates what our clients want. They want the Wizard of Oz. They want the man behind the curtain. They don't want to see how the sausage is made. They just want to see the pretty smoke and clouds and the
those are your
image
next
over
3
it.
T-shirts, by the way, Steve.
There you go, Steve. T-shirt ideas. I like it. I like it. I'm definitely not the T-shirt guy. That being said, having a podcast of our own and the types of podcasts, maybe we get into that later. We introduce clients to the joy of podcasting. Imagine coming on the mic, having a great discussion with someone that you now have opened up a network, you've created a friendship, you've both explored something, you've both come away with hopefully more knowledge and a stronger network, and now you have a bond that a lot of people don't have. I think that's what a lot of prospective clients want out of podcasting, what they really feel, not so much of like, oh, this audio was iffy, I'm going to give it to my editor. My editor's going to make it sound great. They love that, and sure, they enjoy that, but I think they really appreciate that when things break down. But yeah, the perfectionism is a big thing that gets us in the way of not doing it. And now I've come to realize that hey, it's okay. It doesn't matter. Do everything else with your show of how the sausage is made, so then you can really empathize with your prospective clients.
To expand on that, though, is perfect better than done? So I'm seeing some heads shaking.
We're shaking no, left and right.
Okay, so a guy said once. Is not an everyday vernacular for people. John had mentioned he comes from radio. I come from radio as well. And so the question is, listening to a talk radio station. I mean, who listens to the radio nowadays? I know. That's why I'm in podcasting.
Ditto.
And but to listen to live talk show on the radio versus a produced podcast, you're going to hear lip smacks. You're going to hear ums. So, okay, yeah, I probably edit out 75% of the ums. But like I said, is an everyday thing that everybody does.
Well, it also depends on the context of what they're saying. If they're sharing information, data, education,
The type of show.
it's
Yeah.
much more important to remove those things. I was editing something yesterday. An expert in his field was telling about this study, this survey, and he said 3 times in a sentence. It really did not, maybe I'm more sensitive than other people, but it really made him sound unsure of the information he was sharing. We clean it up, we make it sound better. Now, John, you've been in radio. Steve, you've been in radio. You've got some voice exercises you do. You've got some practice. You did your tapes. You did your runs. You did, what do you call those things? I don't even know what they are. You've got practice, where a lot of people who come to the podcasting space, they're just passionate and really good at whatever the topic is, and they're not experts in speaking. Maybe they don't have the skills like we do to be able to run and talk and well, here I'm stuttering and saying things twice here.
We have the skills to fix that in post, but not necessarily the skills to perfect that in presentation, which actually, again, I turn lemons into lemonade, is our strength. If we can figure out how to reduce our crutch words when presenting, we can confer that to our clients, and that way they are better podcasters on the mic, and thereby our post-production becomes a little bit better, and they're more confident on doing more shows.
That goes back to mentoring your client, and not only, again, proper mic work, staring at the camera and not the video screen, and making them a better broadcaster. And I think that's where John, who has the radio background, who I've got the same mic. I mean, mic technique is paramount. Someone who is this far away from the microphone, and you go, "Oh my gosh, now he's way off mic," and how do you fix that in post? And so, yeah, there are ways that we can make it happen in post, but if you can prevent it before post, saves us time.
Yeah. So we don't just edit, we coach.
Yeah.
And having a podcast of our own shows us how we can coach or how we can coach better, or the new opportunities and the new challenges to make that coaching have an even greater impact. The tips and tricks from 2010 aren't relevant today in 2025.
Oh, is that why I'm failing? I'm still using the old technology and the old
it's reel-to-reel tapes.
Yeah, we're doing Skype with Pamela for this interview and everything, right?
Pamela.
And we've got our mixer with the mix minus, and anyway, that's extreme inside baseball. Steve, get us back on track. Should we podcast or not?
You're dusting off some old words, dude.
Right? And I think a lot of it, many of us grew up in that era of podcasting, and that was the big thing of like, how do I take this rat's nest of cables and make it happen? Well, now the technological barrier has been reduced. The number of podcasts have exploded. The number of active podcasts really hasn't crept up that much, because then it's really the rubber that meets the road. That's where people get tripped up. And if we can help them with that, then we have successful clients and we have a successful business. And one of the best ways of doing that is having our own show. Is it challenging? Yes. Do you need to come up with a way to work around perfectionism? Sure. But, doing that, doing the reps makes you better. It's like, for example, if I was a marathon runner 20 years ago and I hit my peak, like, oh, you know what? I'm the perfect marathon runner. I don't need to train anymore. I know how to run a marathon. And that was 20 years ago. And now somebody comes to me like, hey, how do you run a marathon? I'm out of shape. I haven't run a marathon. I don't even remember what the challenges are. I think it's important to keep those skills a little active on your own, and not so much on, whatever somebody is telling you where they want to go.
All right. So I'm going to wrap it up here. I want to give I want you to grade on a scale of 1 to 10, the importance. So 1 being not important at all, 10 being, it's really important. Like you have to. Should podcast editors have a podcast? Scale 1 to 10. John Gay, 1 to 10. 10 being the most important. 1's not.
6.
6. Interesting. I think I'm going to ask you to go into why you picked a 6. That's almost very middle of the road.
I was going to cop out and say 5, but I figured I had to go one way or the other on it. But for all the reasons we talked about in the last, half hour or so, it really gives you a sense of what your clients are dealing with. It gives you a firsthand ability to relate to them. It doesn't have to be, to Julie's point, the gold star, North Star of all podcasting. But, it's like you tell a podcaster when they're just starting out, the hardest thing is jumping into the pool and doing it. And it's not, that's the hardest part, is AFDI and actually starting it, is you have to just do it. So do it to give yourself that reference point to make yourself better able to relate and coach your clients. If you don't, it's not the end of the world. That's why I didn't go higher than 6. But it can really set you apart and give you a leg up on your competition, because there's a lot of podcast editors out there.
Julie, I'm going to ask you the same question. I don't want an it depends answer, just like John gave.
Wow.
1 to 10. Should podcast editors have a podcast?
I reject that. I need the space to explain.
Okay, do so. Give me the number and then tell me why.
I'd hate to be a copycat, but I think I'm also going to say 6. And my explanation is that it depends on what your goals are for your business. I brand myself, I don't call myself a podcast editor anymore. My brand is the podcast teacher, and I call myself a podcast coach, a podcast growth coach, because that is more of my focus. I have a background as an elementary school teacher. I didn't work in radio, so that teaching part, that coaching part is much more of my passion and what I want to do more of. And so if I just wanted it to simply be transactional of a client coming to me with an audio file, I make it nice for them and give it back, then maybe I don't need my own podcast. But if I want to lean into that part that excites me more and do sorry, of course, my lawnmower showed up at this exact moment. I don't know if you can hear that, but
Get that great windscreen, though. You're good.
I got to tell you, the bingo card is filling up.
ooh, goodness. So if I'm leaning more into that part that the coaching, the teaching, the interacting with my clients in that way lights me up, I feel like I need to have the firsthand experience. So I know you don't like the "it depends" answer, but I really truly think that it does depend on what your goals are for your business.
All right, Steve Cosio,
Yes.
1 to 10, should podcast editors, podcast managers, should they not be only behind the mic, but be on the mic as well?
I give that a 3.
3, okay.
3.
Okay,
Because-
and your reasoning?
Yes, as long as the editor has the experience to coach, the editor has the experience to edit and to market and do the show notes and blah 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 blah. Is it important for an editor to have their own podcast? No, but again, as long as they've got the experience to do the coaching, the mentoring, and the marketing and the managing of a podcast. It depends, like the other one said.
There he goes. Mark, I'm not going to ask you, or should I ask you the question?
You can ask me the question. If you don't like my answer, you can cut it. That's
No,
how it works.
I'd rather
post,
just
right?
ask you the question.
You know, I'm going to say, I'm going to go the other direction. I'm going to say an 8. I'm going to say a podcast editor. For me, it's a podcast editor, manager, a producer, coach, all those things, a post production professional, anything that's outside of content creation on the microphone. I'm going to give that an 8. I think they should have a recent experience on the microphone. It's going to be very hard to be a coach if you haven't been on the microphone recently or ever. So that's why I say an 8. And I also would extend that to say podcast editors, managers, producers, coaches, all the titles, the people that work in the podcasting industry to make this magic happen. I think they should have recent podcasting experience as a host. I think they should have some experience as a co-host where another host is leading most of the conversation and you have guests. And I also think that you should be a guest on other people's shows. You should be able to have recent experience on how the sausage is made in every aspect of podcasting. Do you need to do that daily, weekly, monthly? No. But does it need to be recent? Sure. Because I know firsthand the skills do get stale after a while.
But does the experience have to be podcasting as opposed to, John and me, broadcasting?
Yes. It does have to be podcasting other than broadcasting, because the logistics behind broadcasting. Now, granted, I'm not a broadcaster, but I have worked with broadcasters, and the logistics of podcasting is substantially different. Getting the guests, booking the guests, showing them how to be on the microphone, coaching them that they need to do things like, wear headphones, doing the audio check, because a lot of times we're remote, we're not in person. I have them tap on the microphone. Broadcasting, typically you're in the studio, you're like, yeah, I know that's a microphone because their studio engineer set up the microphone. And podcasting, maybe not so much. And then getting ahead of those, like how to coach or lead your prospective guest, like, hey, show up with a microphone and headphones. If you don't have one, here's a couple links to get you started. If you absolutely can't, hey, here's an app to use. Now there's a lot of apps where you can dial in remotely. And may or may not be available in the broadcasting space. So yeah, I would say even if you are an expert broadcaster, it's probably beneficial to have some recent experience in podcasting.
Okay, I raised my answer to 5.
You help him grow some points there.
How about you, Steve? Let me turn it on you because you did turn it on me. Do you think, yeah? As a 10 or as a 5?
I commend all of you for being able to answer that. That's a tough question for me to answer. I am going to say it's a 10. That it's really important that podcast editors know how all the things work. Just like Mark was saying, we do better work when we understand all of the nooks and crannies of podcasting. However, I phrased the question as should. So I'm going to say a 1 when it comes to should, because there are people who are working for NPRs and the Freakonomics radios and stuff who aren't podcasting, but they're employed by this company to do the things within there to make a podcast. Now, there's people who have studio engineering degrees. I think of Tom Kelly. I think he had a show before he started his first podcast, but he was editing shows for a living before he started his podcast, which only ran for maybe, 16 episodes, I think it was, which I think we all miss. But he was killing it with his business. Was he hurting anybody by not being an expert in all things? I don't think so. I think he's helping a lot of people. So I have to answer both ways because it's a trick question. Sorry, guys. I had to ask you a trick question, but we had such a great discussion about this. I do hope that people who are watching or listening to this right now internalize all this. Come up with your own answers. Is this a time for you to be podcasting? Should you start a podcast? Should you slow down or quit doing a show because it's getting in the way of doing good work? I want to thank our panelists here. I want to start with John Gay, who is Jag Podcast Productions. Not podcasting productions, podcast productions. Yes? No ing?
No ing, just Jag Podcast Productions. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, and they can find you at
jagpodcastproductions.com. Appreciate the plug.
Excellent. And Julia Levine, you are the podcast teacher. Where can people find you and hear your show?
Yeah, they can find me at thepodcastteacher.com. My show is podcasting for solopreneurs, and I especially love working with people in a coaching capacity for that growth, for that turning listeners into clients piece. So if you're looking for an editor with more of a coaching angle, I'm your girl.
And Steve Cosio from Mansfield, Texas. Or is it Pennsylvania?
There are 18 Mansfields around.
How did I know you would know that?
Yeah. That's a long story. Anyway, PM, Podcast Mansfield, that's the studio that people come to record. And then there's also the AM, which is my podcast about Mansfield, which is local news for the city of Mansfield, Texas, not Louisiana or Mansfield, Ohio, or the other 17. Podcast Mansfield. That's where you can find me, podcastmansfield.com.
Well, I definitely appreciate all your contributions. And Mark Deal, you are the real deal. Thanks for hosting the show.
Thanks for having me, Steve. And a big thanks to our panel for being so open and honest today. For the listener, if you've been thinking about starting your own show but can't seem to make it happen, you're not alone. Inside Podcast Editor Academy, we makes it possible to both run a client-focused business and to keep your own podcast alive. Plus, you'll join a supportive community of editors who get it. They face the same challenges, and together we have found creative solutions. Visit podcasteditoracademy.com to learn more. Join us and start building the kind of podcasting presence that works for you. Until next time, keep editing, keep learning, and keep building your business.